So my name is Tyran Lewis, and I'm an occupational therapist projects professional that has worked across Live Up, KeepAble, at Chat, and the Digital Pilots projects of ILA. So today specifically, I will be presenting on cognition and low-risk AT with a focus on why timing matters, and more specifically, what assistive technology support can be provided interim to allied health or medical involvement. So throughout this presentation, I will refer to assistive technology as AT. Here are some maybe familiar examples of AT that might be used in supporting cognition. From left to right, we have a whiteboard, a keyboard, calendar clock, medical organizer, and medication organizer, and a mobile alarm. So none of these are particularly high tech, definitely within what we might consider a low risk range, but we did see a lot of changes through the ATHM, which I'll go to later. So before discussing how some of these low cost AT solutions might be used in practice, I'll lay a quick foundation on what neurocognitive decline is and highlight the importance of being responsive to cognitive changes that might be observed in everyday practice. Okay, so the points that I would like to raise today are that care partners and support workers specifically are in the best position to notice early cognitive changes, to respond timely, and to explore low risk AT with clients during their best window of opportunity to establish these supports in their routines. So I've broken that down into 3 points here: the early support window, observational gray areas, support levels, and AT. So we'll start with the early support window. So referring back to this pyramid, it is a simple visual representation for neurocognitive decline, from which we'll start at the foundation here, which is age-related cognitive change. So age-related cognitive change refers to our crystallized and fluid abilities. As we age, crystallized abilities such as our knowledge and vocabulary will tend to remain relatively stable, which you can see is that green representation line on the graph there. Whereas our fluid abilities, that dotted line, our processing speed and complex problem solving will gradually decline with age. This doesn't stop us learning new things, however. We must acknowledge this as the greatest opportunity to learn and establish new supports in our routines as the day-to-day norm. So this is the foundation to the pyramid, and since we have just started the build, we would find ourselves with a lot of capacity to offer, whilst also acknowledging that other factors can increase the rate of cognitive decline. Sooner tends to be better earlier than later. So now moving into mild cognitive impairment. If our client is diagnosed with MCI, we would expect that their independence remains mostly intact, whilst existing day-to-day routines will start to become more difficult. They may still complete these tasks, but cognitive difficulties are undeniably getting in their way. And so what we'll see is an increase in our clients' need for support by carers and services. Their capacity for learning new AT is also becoming smaller as more of their resources, going back to this pyramid, are being used to move up the pyramid, reaching the top. If there is further decline where dementia is diagnosed, then we would know that more than one of these cognitive domains on the left are impacted. And that would result in significant difficulty in existing routines where there is more reliance on support to complete different routines. So just to quickly reassure you, it is the responsibility of the medical and allied health team to determine which of these domains are impacted. So we're not asking you to make that determination, but be aware that this is the range in which it could be impacted. Now, before proceeding, I would like to make clear that neurocognitive decline is not certain, meaning that not everyone will progress to having mild cognitive impairment and not everyone will progress to having dementia. But throughout each stage of decline, we must acknowledge establishing new supportive routines with AT and strategies only becomes more difficult. And it is more common for our clients to revert to what is familiar and comfortable where these progressions occur. And that is not saying that learning and making changes is impossible, but it definitely doesn't become any easier. And so, knowing we need to make the most of our largest window and greatest opportunity for learning and establishing new supportive routines brings me to this next point, the grey in between. So, coming back to this representation of neurocognitive decline, the grey areas here is certain as grey hairs in aging. So, between each of these points where a diagnosis is provided, signs of cognition and cognitive changes are occurring. So these changes can be subtle at first, but they can become more apparent and recognizable through reoccurring patterns. So if we move to Margaret, our client for the day. So Margaret lives independently. She has no cognitive diagnosis, and she currently receives support for heavier household tasks due to joint pain reducing her physical capacity. Now, in Margaret's current state, her capacity to complete tasks can mask or make early signs of cognitive impairment easier to overlook. So, Margaret cooks, she cleans, manages her bills, and administers her own medication. Currently, there have been no incidents raising concerns. But what we might notice in that time is that Margaret tends to misplace her keys somewhere about the house, and that requires her to search. She may start second guessing herself about turning off the iron and will need to double check. Taking longer to manage her bills, you might notice a small pile accumulating on the table, or even resuming tasks from the wrong spot after being interrupted with something like a phone call. So, because Margaret recovers, corrects herself, or gets the task done in the end, these changes are easy to dismiss. And even though they tell us something important about increasing cognitive effort, they can be covered. So, realizing after the fact appears fine because the outcome itself is fine. She gets it done. Double checking or second guessing herself can be seen as being cautious or careful. Taking longer to complete a task could be attributed to that task as being complex, or maybe she's just been tired and found it more difficult as a result of. And losing track could be explained as distraction or not difficulty resuming that task. So, where these observations are noticed, we want to be mindful not to be too direct. Margaret and other clients may be confronted with these changes occurring. So, it can be common for clients to be cautious of acknowledging these changes due to a fear of that diagnosis label, being concerned that this confirms a loss of their independence, or even that believing that nothing can be done in response to these changes. So, where these observations are made, stay solutions focused and suggesting that there may be a handy tool that could help, or another phrase that is more approachable and less serious in nature would be a good way to raise this with Margaret. So, as quickly mentioned before, there are many potential reasons or causes for cognitive changes to be occurring that are not to do with progressive cognitive decline. Here are some examples listed. And now, for of these examples, they could also be reversible, fluctuating, or even situational. Um, but just like those domains that I mentioned before, we do not expect you to work out what this underlying cause might be. But know that raising these signs with the carer and escalating any concerns will see a response sooner rather than later. So, talking about sooner rather than later, it is also important to acknowledge that the longer these cognitive changes continue to go unnoticed and unreported, the further delay we could see across this process. So a delay in arranging GP appointments, OT referrals, updating care plans, and changes to services received. This is a call to action for our frontline to be empowered to work with our clients, to be involved in the establishment of supportive routines and not idle whilst awaiting a diagnosis. So now that we have the foundation of why timing matters, we can enter what low risk AT and cognitive strategies you may explore with your client. So to start, here is a simplified version of the levels or ways in which we may provide support to someone. The lower the level of support, while still completing that task safely, the greater the level of independence that is retained. So AT can also be considered in this way. It can be so supportive that it is doing the task for us, or so with our ultimate goal of retaining independence, our focus comes to environmental supports and how we may use AT as environmental support. Now, the first thing that needs to be considered here is what AT is low risk and available for support workers and care partners to explore with their clients as interim supports and without the first oversight of allied health or medical. So, as aged care transitions towards the Sport Home program, I've aligned the following suite of AT suggestions to comply with the ATHM list, which stands for Assistive Technology and Home Modifications, for what AT is considered low risk. So, being simple and relatively low cost daily living products that need no prescription or customization. There are two sections of the ATHM that I would like to draw quick attention to. That first section is managing time, memory, and planning. Here we can see that clocks, timepieces, calendars, time structuring, and memory supports are all considered prescribed only AT. Now, this is part of the recent changes of the ATHM. If your client already has these involved in their own routines, that is fine. We're not telling you to now go limit them from having that in their routine. Um, but we do want to now consider what you can explore with your clients, and these being prescribed items would need to be left for allied health intervention. A potential reason these might be considered prescribed is to prevent covering signs of cognitive decline, which could then delay escalation. So it is important to be aware of how your client supports themselves and how you then support your client. So this section gives the green light to tactile and visual materials for the purpose of orientation. So to keep a reasonable scope, I will focus on visual materials, which could be bright colored tapes, markers, signs, or placemats with high contrast. These can be used to bring someone's awareness to their time, place, and surroundings. When it comes to AT, there is an overlap or can be an overlap between memory and orientation, which comes down to how the AT itself is used rather than the object itself. So, memory aids such as calendars or alarms support remembering by offloading the recalling of that task. Orientation aids, however, can raise awareness but do not offload any of the task. So let's use this whiteboard as a quick example. Hanging the whiteboard on the front door, on the back of the front door, it exists as environmental support. However, because it says remember your phone, wallet, and keys, it could be considered a memory aid as it offloads your client recalling what it is exactly that they need before leaving. If it instead makes an indirect statement like, have you got everything you need? This is now a prompt for your client in still needing to recall what it is they need. So, yes, I need my phone, wallet, and keys before leaving. Now, understandably, this would help some of our clients to a degree, but not all. And so I am suggesting these as entry level points. So, although this can be considered as an environmental support, because we aren't saying it, it does move us closer to what would otherwise be a verbal prompt. And so, this could be a good option where our clients have a greater need for more direct support. So, still aligning with the ATHM, there are a few more things that we can reach for. Items for organizing non liquid medications, such as this tablet organizer, are also funded as low risk and are a great option for organizing medications specifically. Whereas trays, files, and boxes are considered out of the scope and not funded. However, for the purpose of organization, this does mean that you can explore these options as environmental supports where they can actually provide cognitive support to your client in their routines. So now that we have a lot more options to fill in these gaps, here are some environmental principles for AT, which you can use creatively then for some AT options that are out there. So, number one being keep items visible and close to where they are to be used. Number two, give each item a home that is obvious where it can be found easily. Number three, organize any clutter that causes visual noise or distraction. Number four is color and contrast are great for drawing attention where it is needed. Number five, arrange tasks in a flow from left to right, just as we would read. And number six, reset the stage so it is ready for its use next time. So AT can address multiple of these points at the same time, but as I go through the examples, I will just pick three to focus on. Now, if we return to Margaret, we can suggest some low risk AT items for her to choose from that also retain her independence while also making it an easier form, more easily form supportive routines that we're reaching her at an earlier stage rather than later and waiting for a diagnosis. So for Margaret, misplacing her keys at home, here Margaret remains independent by actively remembering her keys when entering and exiting home because she now has a KeepAble. Now, the KeepAble provides one obvious home for her keys that remain visible on the small table near her door where she exits and enters, and where the stage can easily be reset by returning her keys to the convenient location. If we are then in a scenario where Margaret is requiring further support, a combination of AT options could be useful, such as placing the bowl under a high contrast mat. And also, as mentioned earlier, we may turn to an indirect written prompt, such as the whiteboard. So number two, Margaret remains independent and remembering whether the iron has been turned off after use. To support this, we could use some bright colored tape, which can be placed near the switch for the iron. Um, this could draw her attention to the PowerPoint and reinforcing and confirming with herself that she has in fact turned off the iron for the day. If a stronger alternative is required, we could look at using a high contrast placemat that is fire resistant, considering the heat of the iron, where the iron can live. So this could be an obvious home for the iron, but it could also be placed far enough away that the power cord cannot reach, therefore confirming that the iron is indeed off every time it's placed back into that area. So these supports allow the environment to confirm completion, reducing the need to return and recheck for Margaret. Number three, Margaret is still managing her bills independently, although taking longer and requiring more focus. So reducing the visual noise could be using a tray organizer for all of her stationery. It could also be using colored coded files as an obvious place for paid and unpaid bills. You could also suggest ranging this workstation so that unpaid bills remain on the left side, whilst paid bills return to the right side of the table. Number 4 being that Margaret loses her place after a distraction like a phone call, which could be a number of activities for Margaret. So let's say for number 1, it could be her knitting. Now, for Margaret being an experienced knitter, she may already use something like a knitting marker pictured here. However, we might now suggest that Margaret use them more frequently as she counts the stitches and have a color with contrast to her material on standby to ensure that it's easy to spot. For cooking, number 2, we could say that a high contrast sticky tag on the step that we're up to on the recipe or even the ingredient itself could be a way to return and prompt where Margaret is returning to. Laying these ingredients out as well from left to right could also support Margaret's returning to that task. So I didn't warn you about this slide, but with these new cognitive powers comes great responsibility. And that responsibility is documentation. Now, this isn't a place for SAS, but it can be. Um, Documentation here is extremely important to recognize these patterns of cognitive changes occurring so that we can identify them and also escalate them. So your workplace may have a documentation format, but we do want to ensure that it is adequate to see these changes within the documentation. So it is very helpful to have a description of how you provided that support, if there is any AT involved, and if those supports are successful and safe. So SAS might be a way to remember that. If you do have notice a pattern of these changes occurring, emerging, discuss that with your supervisor and please escalate any of those concerns. So this is exactly why timing matters. The stronger the cognitive foundation, the greater the window of opportunity for Margaret and any other client. The earlier cognitive support needs are then uncovered, the more likely your client will also notice, understand, and integrate these environmental supports into their day-to-day routines, all while keeping clients both cognitively active and independent. So before finishing, I would just like to draw quick attention to Live Up as having a lot of fantastic resources, specifically around low risk AT in different languages and also a range of First Nations resources. So please give that a Google.